A woman from the city came to my orchard to buy my land out from under me, and she brought the paperwork to take everything my family had grown for 100 years. 6 months later, she was on her knees in my dirt teaching my daughter to plant a tree. Before I tell you how the woman sent to pave my orchard ended up saving it, and how my little girl grew the thing that changed both our lives, do me one favor. If you believe that the land remembers who loves it and that some things are worth more than any price, then hit that subscribe button right now, because this story is planted deep and it bears fruit all the way to the end. Stay with me. My name is Nathan Reed. I'm 43 years old, weathered in the way the sun and the work make you and I grow apples and peaches and pears on 80 acres that my family has farmed for 4 generations. My great-grandfather planted the first trees. Some of them are still standing, gnarled old giants that shouldn't still be bearing and somehow still do. And every spring they blossom, like they're showing off, like they're telling the younger trees how it's done. I grew up in the rows of that orchard. I learned to walk in that dirt. My father is buried at the edge of the north field under a pear tree he planted the year I was born. And that is not a metaphor, that is a fact, that is where he is. And I mow around him careful every week. I run the orchard with my daughter now. Her name is Willow. And yes, her mother named her after a tree because her mother loved growing things almost as much as I do. Her mother's name was Beth, and I met in agricultural college and came back to work this land together, and we had 8 good years and 1 daughter before a farming accident took her. A tractor rollover on a wet slope. The kind of thing that happens on farms, the kind of thing you're always warned about and never believe will be you. Willow was 4, and I became a single father on 80 acres running an orchard alone that 2 people had struggled to run together, and grieving a wife the land had killed on the very land that killed her, which I could not leave because it was the only thing holding me and my daughter up. I'll tell you the hardest part of those first years, the part nobody warns you about. It wasn't the work, though. The work nearly killed me too, one man doing the labor of 3 up before the sun and out past dark. A toddler on my hip in the rows because I couldn't afford childcare and couldn't afford to stop. The hardest part was that I loved and hated the same 80 acres at the same time every single day. This land was my whole family, 4 generations of us, my father under the pear tree, my great-grandfather's giants still bearing. And this land had reached up on a wet spring morning and taken my wife. How do you stay somewhere that murdered the person you love most? I asked myself that 1,000 times. And the answer was always the same, and it was always Willow. Because Beth was in this dirt too, her ashes in the south field, her hands in every tree she'd planted, and to leave the land would have been to leave her, and to stay was to be haunted. And there was no version where it didn't hurt, so I chose the version where at least my daughter got to grow up in the place her mother loved. I stayed for the same reason I couldn't bear to stay. That's grief on a farm. The ground gives and the ground takes, and you plant in it anyway. The orchard was dying, and I want to be honest about that because it matters. Not the trees, the business. Small family orchards are being squeezed out everywhere by the big industrial operations and the cheap imports and the grocery chains that want a perfect uniform apple 12 months a year. I was drowning in debt I'd taken on after Beth died when I hired help. I couldn't really afford because I couldn't do it all myself with a small child. The equipment was old. The good years barely covered the bad ones. I was that autumn 3 payments behind on a loan against the land, and the bank was not sentimental about pear trees or dead fathers, which is when Rachel Vance drove up my dirt road in a car that had never seen a dirt road before. She was a developer's representative, though she softened it with a nicer title. Her company bought rural land cheap from farmers who were failing and turned it into what they called master-planned communities, which is a clean way of saying they cut down the orchards and poured the foundations and named the streets after the trees. They'd bulldozed Orchard Lane and Pear Blossom Court gravestones with street signs. She was maybe 38, sharp, city-dressed with dark hair and a way of looking at my land that I recognized instantly, and hated the look of someone seeing not what a thing is but what it could be turned into. She had done her homework. She knew about my loan. She knew about my 3 missed payments. She'd come, she said, with an offer that would clear all my debt and leave me with enough to start over somewhere. And she laid the paperwork on the hood of her car on my own land, and she said, "Mr. Reed, I know this is hard, but you're going to lose this land to the bank in a matter of months anyway." I'm offering you a way to walk away with dignity and a fresh start instead of watching them take it for nothing. It's the smart choice. It's the only choice, really. She wasn't wrong about the numbers. That's what made it so hard. She was offering me a way out of a hole I could not climb out of on my own. And I looked at this woman standing on 4 generations of my family, offering to buy my father's grave and pave it into Pear Blossom Court, being reasonable, being kind, even in her way. And I said the only thing I could say. No. She blinked. Mr. Reed, I don't think you understand the position you're... I understand it fine, I said. My father's buried in the north field. My wife's ashes are in the south. My great-grandfather's trees are still bearing fruit out there, older than your whole company. You want to cut them down and name a street after them. I'd rather lose this land to the bank than sell it to you to pave, because at least when the bank takes it, the trees are still standing when I drive away. Get off my land, please. Politely, but get off. And Rachel Vance, to her credit, gathered her paperwork and left. But she looked back once at the old trees, and there was something in her face I didn't have time to read, and it turned out to be the thing that changed everything. Here's what I didn't know. My daughter Willow, who was 9 by then, had been up in the old climbing tree near the drive, and she'd heard the whole thing. And that night at dinner she said, "Dad is the tree lady going to take our orchard." And I told her the truth, more of it than I probably should have, because after Beth I'd promised myself I'd never lie to my daughter the way grief makes you want to lie to children. I told her we were in trouble. I told her we might lose it. And Willow, 9 years old, was quiet for a while, and then she said something that lodged in me like a seed. She said, "Then we should plant more trees. If they're going to take it, we should make it as much of an orchard as we can first. So even if they pave it, there's more of it to remember. Plant more trees on land you're about to lose." It made no financial sense at all. It was the most beautiful and stubborn thing I'd ever heard, and it was pure Beth, pure her mother, and I could not say no to it. So that's what my daughter and I did that fall in the shadow of losing everything. We planted trees, young whips, bare root saplings. I got cheap because who plants trees on a doomed farm? And Willow and I put them in the ground together on the weekends, defiantly, lovingly planting a future on land we didn't expect to keep. And I have to tell you, those were some of the best days I'd had since Beth died, which makes no sense and is completely true. There is something about digging a hole and setting a young tree in it and covering its roots and watering it that a body understands even when a mind is grieving. Willow named every tree we planted. She'd stand back after we finished one and consider it seriously and give it a name. And she kept a notebook of them, the names and where they were and the day we planted them. Her mother's habit exactly. Beth had kept the same kind of notebook. And I never told Willow that I just watched my daughter reinvent her dead mother's practice from scratch out of her own blood, and I had to walk to the end of the row sometimes so she wouldn't see my face. We planted 42 trees that fall. My daughter can still tell you all 42 names. She was planting a monument, though she was too young to call it that. She was making sure that if they took the orchard, there'd be more of it to mourn, more of her mother in the ground, more evidence that a family had loved this place. It was the bravest act of defiance I have ever been part of, and it was led by a 9-year-old with a notebook. And Rachel Vance came back. That's the part I didn't expect. She showed up on a Saturday, not in the city car this time, in something more sensible, and not with paperwork. She stood at the edge of the field where Willow and I were planting, and she watched us for a while, and then she walked over and she said, "Why are you planting trees? You're going to lose the farm. My offer's still on the table and it won't be forever. Why would you plant trees you'll never see grow?" And before I could answer, Willow did. My 9-year-old looked up from the hole she was digging and said with the total certainty of a child, "Because the trees don't know they're being sold. They just want to grow, so we're letting them." And Rachel Vance stood very still. I learned about Rachel slowly after that, and it explained the look I'd seen. She had grown up on a farm herself. A dairy farm. 2 states away that her family lost when she was 12, to a bank and then to a developer, and she'd watched it happen, watched the herd sold off and the barn torn down, and the field she'd grown up in turned into a subdivision, and it had broken something in her that never healed right. And here was the terrible logic of what she'd become. She'd gone to work for the developers for the winning side because she'd decided as a heartbroken 12-year-old that if the world was going to tear down farms, she'd rather be the one holding the clipboard than the one crying in the driveway. She'd spent 20 years buying up other people's farms and telling herself it was mercy, telling herself she was helping families walk away with dignity because it was the only way she could live with what had happened to her own. And she'd driven up my road that first day and seen my great-grandfather's trees still bearing older than her company. And she'd seen my daughter in the climbing tree, and it had cracked the whole thing open. I have paved over 40 farms, she told me one evening, months in sitting on my porch steps because she kept finding reasons to come back. 40. I tell every family the same thing I told you, that it's the smart choice, the dignified exit, and every single time I'm 12 years old again, standing in my own driveway watching them do it to us, except now I'm the one doing it. I thought if I was on the side that wins it wouldn't hurt. It hurts more. It's just the same wound 40 times over, and I'm the one holding the knife now. She looked out at Willow's new little trees. And then your daughter told me the trees don't know they're being sold, and I couldn't sleep for a week. She told me about the day her family lost their dairy in more detail than I think she'd told anyone. She was 12 and it was February, and she remembered the exact sound the cattle truck made, backing up the drive, and how her father had gone out to load his own herd onto it and couldn't look at any of them, and how her mother stood at the kitchen window, not moving for so long that Rachel thought something was wrong with her. And she remembered the developer's man in a good coat, standing in the driveway with a clipboard, being kind, being reasonable, telling her father it was the smart choice, the dignified exit. I hated that man more than I have ever hated anyone, Rachel said. And then I grew up and I became him. I put on the good coat and I picked up the clipboard, and I stood in 40 driveways and said his exact words. I told myself I was different because I meant it kindly. He probably meant it kindly too. That's the part I could never face. There's no kind way to hold that clipboard. I just needed there to be so I could keep doing it. And she wiped her eyes, roughly angry at her own tears, and she said, "Your daughter is 12 years younger than I was, and she already understands something I spent 30 years not letting myself know. You don't help a family by helping them leave. You help them by helping them stay." Rachel started coming to the orchard on weekends. Not as a developer. She'd trade her city clothes for jeans and get down in my dirt and learn to plant. And she was terrible at it at first. And Willow, who had appointed herself Rachel's teacher, found this endlessly funny, correcting the grip on the shovel, the depth of the hole, the way you settle the roots. And I watched a woman who'd spent 20 years paving over farms kneel in my orchard and learn to grow something for the first time since she was a child. And I watched my daughter, who had lost her mother to this land, teach a grieving stranger how to love it. And I fell for Rachel Vance in the rows of my dying orchard, slowly, the way trees grow without any single moment you could point to. There was one afternoon I keep. Willow was teaching Rachel to graft, which is a delicate thing, joining a cutting from one tree onto the rootstock of another so that they grow together as one, and it's the oldest trick in orcharding, the way you keep a good variety alive for generations. And Willow had learned it from me, and I'd learned it from my father, and he from his. And I watched my daughter guide Rachel's hands, showing her how to match the cut, just so how to bind it, how the two different trees become one tree if you join them right and give them time. And Rachel got quiet, and I saw her understand the metaphor before either of us said it out loud, that this was what was happening to the three of us. Two wounded root systems being carefully joined, and that if we matched the cut right and gave it time, we might grow together as one thing. She looked up at me across my daughter's head, holding a grafted branch, and neither of us said anything, because some things you don't say, you just graft and wait and hope they take. But I have to tell you about the day it almost all went under, because a happy ending you didn't have to fight the bank for isn't worth telling. The foreclosure came due in the spring, the same spring Willow's little trees put out their first tentative blossoms. I'd known it was coming, and I'd fought it every way a man can, and I'd lost, and the bank set a date to take the land. And Rachel by then was not a developer to me anymore. She was the woman I loved, and she came to me with a look on her face I'd never seen torn up. And she said, "Nathan, I have to tell you something, and you're going to be angry, and you have every right." And she told me that her company still wanted the land, that with me foreclosing, they were circling to buy it cheap from the bank. The moment it was seized, that Pear Blossom Court was still on somebody's drawing board, and that she'd been fighting them internally for months, quietly trying to protect us, and she'd run out of room. She'd been living a double life, loving us on the weekends and fighting for us in boardrooms during the week, and she couldn't hold the two apart any longer. And I did the thing that grief teaches you to do. I got angry and I pushed her away, and I told her to leave, that I should have known that she was a developer to the bone and always would be, that I'd been a fool to let her onto my land twice. I said cruel things because it was easier to lose her on purpose than to lose the land, and her both by accident, Easier to be betrayed than to be helped and still fail. I told her to get off my land the same way I told her the first day, except this time it actually cost me something, and I did it anyway, because I was a man who had already lost his wife to this dirt and did not think he could survive losing anything else, and so I threw away the person trying to save me before she could. She left, and the bank's date came closer, and it was Willow again, who saw what I couldn't. My daughter, 10 by then, found me on the porch the night before the seizure, and she didn't yell at me. She just sat down next to me and said, "You told Rachel to get off our land." "But Rachel's not trying to take our land, Dad. She's the only grown-up who's actually trying to keep it. You got the two ladies mixed up, the developer lady and the Rachel lady. They're not the same person anymore. She changed. I watched her change. I taught her to plant trees." And she leaned her head on my arm and said the thing that broke the whole thing open. "Mom would be so mad at you for sending away somebody who loves us just because you're scared. Mom planted trees on days she was scared. That's what you told me. So do the thing Mom would do. Do the thing Beth would do." I went to find Rachel that night, and what I found out when I found her is the thing that saved us, and it was Rachel's doing, not mine. Because in the days after I threw her off my land, Rachel Vance had done something that ended her career and started her life. She'd gone to her company and she'd resigned, and on her way out, she'd taken everything she knew, 20 years of knowing exactly how developers circle a failing farm, and she'd used it against them. She'd found a land trust, a conservation organization that buys farmland to protect it from development, and she'd brought them my orchard, my great-grandfather's trees, my daughter's story, and she'd made the case of her life, and they'd agreed to buy the land from the bank at the foreclosure, not to pave it, but to preserve it forever as a working orchard with one condition the trust required. And Rachel had insisted on that the family who'd farmed it for 4 generations stay on and keep farming it. Me, Willow, us. She'd found a way for us to lose the debt and keep the land and the trees, all of it, by using her 20 years of paving farms to save one. I found out later exactly how hard it had been. The land trust didn't have the money sitting around. Conservation groups never do. Rachel had spent the days after I threw her off my land making phone calls until 2 in the morning, calling in every contact she'd built in 20 years in the industry, and she'd done something that still humbles me. She'd put up her own savings, everything she had, her entire 20 years of paving farms, turned into money as a bridge to hold the purchase until the trust could raise the rest. She bet her whole future on saving the land of a man who'd just told her to get off it. She'd have been ruined if it fell through. She did it anyway, because she told me later. For 20 years I helped kill farms and told myself it was mercy. I finally had a chance to save one, and it was yours and Willow's, and it was the trees your daughter planted knowing she might lose them. I wasn't going to let the one farm I loved be the 41st I paved. I'd have gone broke. I didn't care. I was finally on the right side of my own driveway. She'd done all of it after I told her to get off my land. She'd saved us while I was busy pushing her away. And when I found her that night and understood what she'd done, I got down in the dirt of my own driveway, the same driveway where a heartbroken 12-year-old had once watched her family's farm die, and I asked her to forgive me for the cruel things I'd said, and to marry me, and to farm this land with me and Willow for the rest of our lives. And she got down in the dirt with me and said yes, and we were both filthy and crying. And it was the best I have ever felt on land that has given me the best and worst of everything. The land trust bought the orchard. We stayed. The trees my daughter planted defiantly on land we thought we were losing are grown now, bearing fruit, and every spring they blossom alongside my great-grandfather's ancient giants, the youngest and the oldest trees on the farm, flowering together. And I think about how those young trees are only alive because a 9-year-old decided you should plant a future even when you think you're about to lose it. Willow was right about everything. The trees didn't know they were being sold. They just wanted to grow, so we let them, and growing them is what saved them. Rachel and I were married in the orchard, of course, under the oldest tree, my great-grandfather's tree, with my father's pear tree, and Beth Southfield, both in sight because I wanted all of them there, the whole family, the living and the dead and the newly arrived. Willow gave Rachel away, in a manner of speaking, walked her down the row of trees they'd planted together, because Willow said she was the one who found Rachel and taught her, and therefore she was the one who should hand her over, and no one argued with the logic. Willow read something at the wedding from her notebook, the one with all 42 tree names in it. She'd added a page. She read the names of the trees she and I had planted the fall. We thought we were losing everything, all 42 out loud, slowly like a roll call of survivors. And then she looked up and said, "These are the trees we planted when we thought we'd lose them. They didn't know. They just grew. And now they're the reason we get to stay, because when Rachel showed the land trust our orchard, these were the trees that made them cry." So the trees we planted to remember the farm are the trees that saved the farm. And there was not a dry eye in the orchard, because a 14-year-old had just explained better than any of us could that the act of loving something you're afraid to lose is not futile. It is the exact thing that saves it. Rachel wore flowers from our own trees in her hair. Beth's mother came and she held my face and said, "Beth would have loved this, would have loved that." The land killed her and then somehow kept growing life anyway, because that was the thing Beth always believed about the orchard, that it takes and it gives. And you can't have the giving without the taking, and you stay anyway, because staying is how you honor both. Rachel runs the business side now, and it turns out 20 years of knowing how developers think makes you very good at keeping developers away. And she's turned the orchard into something that works: agritourism and a farm stand and school visits, where city kids who've never seen an apple on a branch come and learn what Willow taught her, that the trees don't know anything about money, they just want to grow. Willow is 14 now and says she's going to be the 5th generation on this land, and I believe her because she's the one who saved it, the one who understood before any of the adults did that you fight for a thing by loving it out loud, by planting more of it, by refusing to grieve it before it's gone. I told a woman to get off my land twice. The first time I was right too. The second time I was a scared and grieving fool, and I nearly threw away the only person who could save the thing I loved. My daughter had to teach me the difference the same way she taught a developer to plant a tree. Some people come to your land to take it, and some people come to your land and the land changes them, and they stay to save it. The whole trick. The only trick is learning to tell which is which, and my 10-year-old could tell before I could, because she'd watched Rachel kneel in the dirt and learn to grow, and you can't fake that the land knows, and so did my girl. If you made it all the way here, then you already know this was never really a story about an orchard. It was a story about the difference between the people who come to take from us and the people who let our love change them, and about how grief can make us push away the very ones trying to save us. So before you go, do this one thing for me. If there is someone in your life who came in one way and stayed another, who you almost pushed away out of fear and are grateful every day you didn't put their name in the comments, just the name, let them take root for 1 second in a place they'll never see. And if this story reached you, subscribe and stay with me, because I have more of them. True ones, hard ones, stories about the land and the people who love it, and the ones we almost lose because we're too scared to be saved. The next one begins the way all the good ones do, with someone standing on the thing they love, certain they're about to lose it, because that, it turns out, is almost always the exact moment someone kneels down in the dirt beside you and starts to plant.